All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started with today's session. Thanks for joining us. My name is Trina Reagan. I am the lead policy strategist for Empower Missouri, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Sarah Owsley, our Director of Advocacy, and Christine Woody, our Food Security Coalition Policy Manager. So we are thrilled to be here with you today, and we will be talking about an initiative to bring more students under the free school meals. So just to get us started, I wanted to share the agenda with you for today. So we have a lot to cover in the next 57 minutes that we spend together. To ensure that everyone has a chance to do a little bit of networking, though, we're going to start by going into breakout rooms. You will all have about 5 minutes together. Please feel free to introduce yourself, share the organization that you're here today representing, and what it is that brings you into this space. So how are you tied to food security work? All right, I'm going to send you all into rooms and we'll bring you back in 5 minutes. So let's do a little networking. Enjoy. All right, and I think everyone is back with us now. At this point, I would love to turn it over to my colleague, Sarah Owsley, our Advocacy Director, who is going to walk us through some good practices for when you're building relationships with your lawmakers. Sarah, just let me know when you want me to advance slides for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Trina. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. This week, through our week of action, we've had a series of skill building. So we hope that if you haven't joined us for the previous sessions, you spend 10 minutes and review those videos. We certainly have had excellent issue education as well. We've talked about the lawmaking process. We've talked about why your voice is important in advocacy. And today we're going to talk about how to build a relationship with your lawmaker. So Trina, if you want to go to the next slide, you and your clients, your community members, the folks you interact with have important life experiences that lawmakers need to hear. The policies that they pass impact all sorts of folks, including you and the folks that you are closest to. And so it's important that they have that opportunity to know those things, know those experiences, and get that information. We have an ethical duty to the clients that we work with, those of us who work at nonprofits, who would work in direct service, making sure that those folks' voices are heard in the Capitol. We want to make sure that those experiences are communicated with lawmakers who can help ease their lives, right? Policy impacts lives. And finally, a surprising amount of policy traces back to this person came and told me this story, so I passed this bill. You can be that person. It is not uncommon, those of us who have done a lot of work in the building, of lawmakers saying, yes, what happened is one constituent came and told me one story, and that's why I care really deeply about this issue. It is, lawmakers come into the role that they have, knowing what they know and knowing who they know before they decided to run for office. And so we need to expand the table of influencers and folks that they're listening to. We really do have a pretty significant impact, particularly at the state level, with those relationships. Our next slide talks about some tips and tricks for those first interactions or early interactions with lawmakers. We always encourage you to be honest when you're interacting with lawmakers, but those first interactions are going to be brief, and we want them to be respectful. Those of you who were with us yesterday, you probably shared elevator time with some lawmakers. You passed them in the hallway. That's a good opportunity to say, hey, I'm a constituent. I came down here today to talk about, this issue with Empower Missouri. Thank you so much for this vote. Or can you, let's touch base about this issue moving forward. It's very unlikely that you can stop a lawmaker from being reelected, and it's extremely likely that as soon as you threaten to do so, they will no longer talk to you. So don't make threats. Be forceful, right? The things you're talking about are important. They're, significant. They're real, but you can do that without being aggressive. We recommend that those first couple of in-person interactions, particularly that first one, send a thank you note, send a thank you something. A brief interaction and email is probably appropriate. But if you get some significant time with a lawmaker, or you're just meeting them for the first time, if they come to your nonprofit, if you meet them for coffee during the off season, like send them a paper thank you card. I will tell you that often lawmakers will like put those up on their walls in their office. It's like a good reminder to keep you and who you are and your issues top of mind for them, as well as like kind of makes them feel good and see that, you know, they also that you also enjoyed your time with them. As much as possible, to become their like expert, right? You want to become their go-to person. You want to make your time together valuable and positive. And so there might be some interactions that are very uncomfortable because they are likely to do things that you sometimes disagree with. And that's okay. There's a way to say, you know, I really disagree with the way that you voted on this vote, or, you know, your opinions about this topic, but we still can work together on these other topics. Our next slide is about how you kind of like continue that relationship, right? Because what is not likely to happen is your lawmaker is not going to call you up after a first interaction. So instead, we really recommend that you follow their mailing lists, kind of show up where you know that they will be. They'll advertise they're having this community meeting, or they're at, you know, partnering with this organization for this service provision, et cetera. Show up where you know they'll be. Be sure to introduce yourself, remind them what your topic is that you care about. Be that person who they kind of like always expect to be in a housing space, always expect to be in a space where we're talking about nutrition access. Share data and news articles as you see them, things that are relevant to your issue area. Keep your name top of mind for them. And remember that they are elected for a full year, even though they work in the legislature January through May. And so when it's not that time, it's still a good opportunity to meet with them, have coffee in your district, invite them to your organization. You know, get to spend some time with them when it's less pressure and when you have fewer asks. That makes it a lot easier so that you're not just kind of coming to them when you feel like you need something. And then some final reminders about like why this is important. Public relationships, that's the kind of relationship you're building with these lawmakers, are powerful. This is not your personal friend, right? You are building a public relationship where you can help them know how to make good votes, know how to support their constituents, know how to serve the folks who live in their district the best, while they are helping you be able to do the things that are important to you and pass policy that's going to impact your issue area. You will not always agree with every lawmaker on every issue. And we at Empower Missouri really recommend that we avoid sort of litmus test issues. Sometimes lawmakers might have a very different opinion about different topics, but have a similar opinion, or at least be willing to work with you on specific issues. And you can get a lot done in that space, right? So we really recommend that you work with folks when you can. You know, remember the sort of old adage that there's no permanent friends, no permanent enemies in the policy-making space. And finally, remember that you control that communication and practice those boundary statements. That's not what I came here to talk to you about. We might disagree on that, but that's okay. I came to talk to you about this thing, right? That's not my experience. I'm interested to hear your data point, et cetera, right? Those are all good boundary statements that keep you comfortable and keep the conversation productive, which is your goal when you're interacting with lawmakers. If you spend your 10 minutes this week with them arguing, you really miss a week worth of work that could happen, right? So we want to make sure that we're building those public relationships to benefit our issue area. And that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Christine, who's going to talk about school meals.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Sarah. Welcome, everybody. For those who may not know me, my name is Christine Woody, and I am the Food Security Policy Manager at Empower Missouri. I appreciate you all taking some time to talk with us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the National School Lunch and School Breakfast Program and how we in Missouri can expand that to help more students and more families who are struggling to make ends meet every month. So just a few basics so we can kind of be on the same page moving forward, and a little bit of history. So the National School Lunch Program was actually established way back in 1946, and it was signed by Missouri's own President Harry Truman. So it's been around for a significant amount of time, and it helps millions of students every day. the income guidelines, it's set up through that, right? So a family has to meet certain income guidelines for their children to qualify for this program. It's set currently for students to receive a completely free school lunch, school breakfast. They have to be in a family that is at or below 130% of the federal poverty level. There is another category called the reduced price school meals, where that requires the families that fall under this income level to pay a small copay for their kids to receive school meals. So they don't have to pay for the full price of the meals. They just need to pay a small copay for that. And for students to be eligible for that category, they need to be in a household at an income at or below 185% of the federal poverty level. Currently, if you look at that next slide where it says family of four, those translate into those annual incomes specifically. So there is one other category that some schools and school districts fall into. So, I mean, some of your kids may actually be in these school districts, so you're a little confused about how that works. There is some school districts, and they fall into this provision called the Community Eligibility Provision. They're called a CEP school. So if they are in a school district that has 40% or more of the students who are living in that school district who fall into a household that is under the poverty level or under that 130% of the poverty level, the school district can become what is called a CEP school. And that means that the school can provide free school lunch and breakfast to every student that is in that district. So there are quite a few districts in our state that are CEP provision eligible. So even if there's a student that is above those income guidelines, they can receive a free breakfast or free lunch within that school district. So you can either be qualified as an individual applicant or individual eligibility, or you can fall under what is called a community eligibility provision, which does cover every student in every school. So just looking at some of the statistics on the next slide, Trina, I'm sure you've seen kind of state maps like this before. This map is maybe a little difficult to see because it's a little small, but it just is kind of giving you a sense of the food insecurity rates across our state. As you can see, there are lots of counties in our state that have very high food insecurity rates. It's not just an urban or even it's kind of an urban kind of core problem, right? There are lots of counties in our state that are very rural, but are very high in food insecurity rates. And I think that map just highlights that this, food insecurity is a problem that is statewide. The numbers kind of range depending on the year. The statistic is 1 in 6 children in Missouri are experiencing food insecurity. And that's the number that we've been going with recently. During COVID, that number actually was decreased a little bit, which is part of what I'm going to talk in the next couple slides. But it's right around 1 in 6 again, since a lot of those COVID-related provisions have now ended. If you want to go to the next slide, Trina. And so that's where I'm going to talk a little bit about how the pandemic actually changed the landscape of how we think about and how school meals was being administered across the country. So in the midst of the pandemic, Congress understood how key nutrition and food access was. So they made and passed quite a few provisions that addressed food insecurity. So for example, during the midst of the pandemic, they increased everyone's SNAP or food stamp allotments to the highest number of food stamp dollars that a family could receive at that number of families in your household. And so they increased that to the highest level, and they had that for multiple months throughout the pandemic. Another thing that they did was during the pandemic, they paid for and provided free school meals for all students in the schools that ran the federally funded school lunch program. So every student, there was no application, there was no providing income guidelines. It was all students in those schools were given a free school meal. That did not last. In the spring of 2022, they passed a new kind of spending bill and kind of outlined what their plan was for the next few months and the next years. And that free school meals for all provision was ended during that time. So starting in the 2022-2023 school year, the school meals program reverted back to how it was run pre-pandemic. So they had to go back to collecting applications. They had to go back to collecting income guidelines. They set out the free school meal program and the reduced price school meal program. And they had to go back through the application process for all of those students. I think there were lots of things learned, though, during that, couple years where they were providing school meals for all. I mean, research has shown from that time period and in the states where there already is free school meals for all because they funded it statewide, the benefits that are just, extraordinary when you provide a free school meal for all students. And this just kind of is a great chart, I think, that just highlights some of those benefits that not having to do this whole application process and only giving it to certain students. And there's this stigma between the students that do have it and do not have it, kind of shows, right? So it ensures that all students can come to school ready to learn and not have to worry about where their meals are coming from. It reduces the stigma that certain kids have it, certain kids don't, they have a certain, and the students that do and students don't, even though they try to make it as, destigmatized as possible, but it's still there. Another challenge with it, especially for the kids that have the reduced price meal, they are in families that are still struggling every month. So even that copay is a challenge. And so some of these families that are not in the program or are right above the qualifying line, they end up bringing up a lot of unpaid school meal debt. And that is a real thing. I mean, having kids go through the line and saying, well, you haven't paid for your meals for 2 weeks. We can't let you get the regular lunch. We have to give you this bologna sandwich, or we have to give you this, jelly sandwich, and you have to pay this back. And school districts calling, collection agencies to collect the school debt. So, I mean, school debt is a real challenge for families. So not having to worry about covering those costs and providing those funds to do that is a real benefit to those families who are struggling. I mean, I think another aspect of doing it is that it eases a lots of administrative burden. I mean, right now, each school district pretty much runs and provides the application for the schools and for the students. So it's really run school district by school district, and it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of gathering information that the schools and the food service providers within the schools are having to deal with. And it's just a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of paperwork to get that all together. And kind of with that is that these school nutrition operators and administrators are supporting this idea that it really decreases the cost that the school districts have to go through to administer these types of programs. We work really closely with a national organization called FRAC. It's the Food Research and Action Center. They are based in DC, and we are a strong partner of them and rely on them for quite a lot of support on the advocacy that we do on the federal level. During kind of the transition from all school meals being free to going back to where it was pre-pandemic administration, they put on a kind of a poll throughout the national level, different states, different counties, really kind of a wide-ranging poll to kind of just get a pulse of what folks think about school meals and making it permanently free for all students. And they found there was 63% of voters that were in support of legislation to make free school meals permanently available for all students. And the way that our nation is, 63% of support of something is a pretty wide majority. So I think that shows that, school meals and providing those meals for kids is really kind of bipartisan and can really be thought of as something that a lot of voters in lots of different areas really see the benefit of moving forward. So that being said, if Trina, you can see the next slide, there's really kind of 3 pathways that organizations like Empower Missouri and FRAC on the federal level and organizations in other states across the country kind of see as a way to expand school meals moving forward. So the first way that I think FRAC specifically is doing a lot of advocacy on in DC is really working towards getting federal legislation passed that would provide free school meals for all students all at once. And that would be a federally funded sort of program, right? Another way that now, after the states have realized how beneficial this was, there are lots of states who are kind of doing it on the individual level. So Maine, for example, they now have free school meals for all. And that funding for that is coming from the state level general revenue. Colorado did a similar thing. So Colorado, they passed an initiative petition. So it went to the voters, and the voters all agreed that they wanted to have free school meals for all for the students in their state. So Colorado is also implementing free school meals for all students in the state of Colorado, funded by general revenue from Colorado. And then there's another way to do it, is just more incremental, right? So not all students, maybe moving it up to getting rid of the reduced price meal copay, or moving it up to, for all families, up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And that kind of difference, so like from 130 to 200 would all be paid for through state funds. It'd be a state funded way to cover more students, especially the students who are struggling and families with lower income. So there's three options, right? So federal, state, where they completely cover it, or smaller incremental steps. And I guess you can probably see where this is going. There's momentum building. A lot of states are doing this. They're seeing the benefit of what was happening during the pandemic, and they're all thinking about and seeing how their state could do this in a way to move forward. So this is just within the last couple years. You can see on this map just all the states that have either put forth legislation or have passed legislation to create more access to school meals for their families in their states. And Missouri is one of them. We have had some legislation introduced in the state of Missouri. And if you go to the next slide, Trina, you can kind of see, though, from the conversations that organizations like Empower Missouri and some of our other partner organizations have had, and just looking how the state works and the way that our tax base is and the funding that we have available, we really think the most possible plan for Missouri is not trying to pass a healthy school meals for all. We really think the best path forward and the path forward that has probably the path of least resistance and most likely to actually have a chance of happening is really doing more of an incremental step forward, not doing all, but maybe including some. And so we've been doing some kind of work on that. So I think it was about 2 years ago, we were connected with Operation Food Search. They're a food bank that's located in the St. Louis area. They do a lot of work with counties in kind of the eastern part of the state. They connected up with Washington University's Social Policy Institute to pull together a report about what could be feasible in the state of Missouri. So they put together a lot of data points, the cost analysis, what they think is feasible, how it could be implemented in the state. And they really came up to the point that it's going to be, I mean, the biggest factor in getting something like this passed in the state of Missouri is the price, right? So covering all students all across the state would be very, very expensive. Missouri has a difficult time enough passing a budget and not cutting taxes. So really being able to find general revenue enough to cover every student with a free school meal seemed way too far ahead of what we could accomplish as advocates. But I think in the summary of what their report was and what they showed as possible, which I think after looking at it and having conversation, we agreed is something that is possible, is really consider expanding access to free school meals for those students that are already qualified for the reduced price meal. So it would just increase those students that had access up to 185% of the federal poverty level. It would decrease some administrative costs. It would increase the amount of students that were eligible, really targeting those folks who are already struggling and having a difficult time covering those costs for their students. So last year, and then again this year, Senator Angela Mosley has filed a bill to do just that. She is a senator from the St. Louis area. Her bill that she has filed this year is Senate Bill 1154, and it would do just that. It creates the Missouri School Meals Act, which would provide a school lunch for students who qualify for the reduced price school lunch program under the National School Lunch Program. So it would use the funds from the free school lunch program. It would use the federal funds for the students of the reduced price school program, and it would just require the state to cover those copays. So in the end, the students who fall under 185% of the federal poverty level would receive a school lunch for free. So where we are with that bill currently, it has been referred to a committee. I just missed it because it went back. Yep, the Select Committee on Empowering Missouri Parents and Children's Committee. So it's been referred to that committee. It has not had a hearing yet. The way that we've kind of always understood the way the legislative session is that if it hasn't had a hearing by now after spring break, it probably is not going to pass through the whole legislative process and get signed by the governor. So really working on this bill is really all about education, right? It's a stepping stone to get to the point where we think that this bill could pass and get signed into law. So the point of doing the presentation today to kind of educate about this is really to get the conversation started. Really start having conversation with legislators about this program, about the possibility of expanding it, why it's beneficial, why doing it this way is beneficial, getting to the point that in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, we can get it far enough to where it actually can pass and get signed into law. So like I said, we don't have any thoughts that this is going to get signed by the governor this year. This is really just the beginning stages to have those conversations and get legislators to start understanding the importance of a bill like this. So that kind of leads us to what our action is. So it's in the Senate. So we really are focusing on the Senate. And we have a call to action that we've put together. It has some language in there, just doing some really base building education to senators about what this bill is, what it would do, why we think it's important, just to get them like hearing of it and being to the point where they, oh yeah, I heard someone talk about that bill, or I've had a constituent contact me about that bill. So when it does get to the point where it's on the floor or has a committee hearing, they are well aware of it and they've heard about it from us as constituents, as from advocates, before they can move it on to the next step. So if you click on that link that's in the chat, that will take you to a kind of a pre-populated email where you can put your name and your address, and you can add any other language that you would like to add about why you think this is important and why you think this is a good bill and why we should move it forward. And it will send automatically to the senator that's connected to your mailing address. So put your house address, or if you are in a nonprofit and you want to use that address, it can send it to the senator that is represents where your nonprofit is or your organization is. So feel free to click on that. I'm going to give you a minute or two to open that up and take a look and see what it is, see if anybody has any questions about that. But I'm going to give you a minute just to take that action before we move on. And I'll take any questions if anyone has questions as well. Does anyone have any questions for myself or Sarah? Great. Trina, I'll pass it back to you.
It looks like we have one question. Are you aware of research that links, I'm assuming, school meals to improved academics?
Yeah, I don't have any specific links, just like off the top of my head or that I can stick in this chat, Karen, but there is a lot of research that FRAC has pulled together for us that does show those linkages of increased school meals. So I can send you some of those from some of the research that FRAC has done for sure.
I would appreciate that because we're focused on the equity or inequity issues that's facing some of the school districts in St. Louis County.
Yep.
And if we could link this, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, looks like Sarah got that for us.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll look and see if I can find some others as well, Karen, but that can get you started.
Perfect. Thank you.
We have another question in the chat. This person has not figured out how to click on the links. Yes. We will follow up. Danielle, if you want to add your email to the chat, I'd be happy to send you the links for both the call to action and the survey that we're using today. Any other questions? Well, we thank you guys for joining us today, and we would really appreciate it once you finish the call to action, if you would take about 2 minutes to complete this survey. I've put the link in the chat. You'll also see that there is a QR code that you can use on your phone. It really is just a few questions about today's session, as well as there's room for any feedback or suggestions you have regarding future webinars such as this and next year's week of action. And with that, we will all say thank you for joining us today for this brief but hopefully impactful training. And we will give you all 20 minutes back on your day and look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone.